Welcome back to what is the final episode of Miller's Movers. This week a little bit different. I'm going to take a look back at the Punchestown Festival and then have a look at the National Hunt season overall, pull out my best moments, most notable moments. So starting with Punchestown Festival, which I really enjoyed, got a chance to watch plenty of it. And I suppose the first port of call really should be Mystical Power, who reversed Supreme Novice hurdle form with Slade Steel in winning that Grade 1 Novice over 2 miles. Really impressive horse. It's a horse that's grown on me. I didn't have a huge amount of time for him, I have to admit, going into the spring festivals, but you can't help but like how he goes about his business. He's clearly tough, he's clearly talented. Probably didn't travel as deep into the race as you might have expected on this better ground. Slade Steel travelled very well. That was my one concern with him, but Mystical Power really got down, toughed it out, and Slade Steel didn't seem to perhaps see out the trip as well as you might have expected for a horse that has form over further. Henry de Bromhead's horses perhaps throughout the week were just a little bit under what they'd shown at Cheltenham, so that might be an excuse for him, but Mystical Power just can't help but be impressed by him. Now obviously he's going to have to step up into open company, into the champion hurdle sort of grade. Whether he can manage that, I'm not so sure. I would still have State Man and Lossiemouth above him in the Willie Mullins pecking order, but he is a young horse, he is fairly lightly raced. Of course he's open to any amount of improvement, but he was really impressive on the day. Another horse that was really impressive and I was really looking forward to seeing was Daddy Longlegs, son of Al Manzour, back on better ground. I actually touted him in the Cheltenham Preview podcast as a lively outsider if the ground had happened to come up better at Cheltenham. Of course it didn't, it was soft, he didn't even go on the boat over, but he ran away with this novice hurdle. It's gone up £15 in the Irish handicaps now to 150. Just to put that into context, that's the same mark as Slade Steel, just £5 or £4, I think it is actually, below Mystical Power. He's a really talented horse, but he clearly can only operate on a sound surface. His 2 runs through the depths of the winter at Leopardstown on soft and heavy ground were just no good whatsoever. What they do with him next, they talked about maybe going back on the flat. Willie Mullins has obviously done that with great success with Vauban, etc. That might be an option. But he's a horse I firmly have in my memory. I'm not going to forget him. He might well not do much through the early part of the season, but come the spring festivals next year, if he pops up, he's a horse I'll definitely want to be with. Spillane's Tower, I take a slightly different view on this to I think many. He was very impressive and it's a really nice story. Jimmy Mangan, fairly small operator, having a very, very high class horse. But talk of Gold Cups after he ran away with the novice 3 mile chase. It was a very impressive performance. He looks thoroughly uncomplicated. He jumps, he travels, he clearly stays. But he's up now to a mark of 154. To put that into context, JP McManus, his owner, has I Know the Way You're Thinking on 158, Fact to File on 159, Corbett's Cross on 165, and I Am Maximus on 169, all of who could go towards the Gold Cup. I think much is a lovely story. Spillane's Tower has still got plenty to do to prove himself up to that grade, given that he's got to get up to around about 175 to be competitive. That seems like an awful lot of improvement for me, and I do wonder whether the lovely fairy tale story of Jimmy Mangan potentially having a Gold Cup horse has perhaps tinted people's views of what he's actually achieved so far. For all, this was his first try at 3 miles, so he is open to plenty of progress. I appreciate that, but I think the other horse I named as well are also open to progress, and I wouldn't even have him in JP McManus's 3 Gold Cup contenders for next season. The level they've got to get to is that of Galopin de Champ and Fastorslow. Fastorslow got revenge from the Cheltenham Gold Cup, got the better of Galopin de Champ around Punchestown for the 3rd time now, having won this race last year. And I thought it was a very good ride by JJ Slevin. He bossed things from a fairly early stage. Paul Townend looked to go out and make the running, conceded the lead fairly early to Fastorslow, and it was his better jumping that won him the day. I'd been a bit slow to concede that Fastorslow is a better jumper, but I think on this evidence you can't deny that. Galopin de Champs was fiddly at a few, seemed to have his jumping put under pressure. I do wonder whether he travelled with quite the same zest he did at Cheltenham Gold Cup. It's clear that he puts plenty into his races, probably isn't at his best at Punchestown, but that shouldn't take away from the performance Fastorslow put in. Official handicapper still has them around about £7 apart, 179 to 172. I think Fastorslow has got to go and prove that he can beat an on-form Galopin de Champs, because I do think there's no doubt he was slightly below his best, but it adds for a very nice make-up to the Gold Cup next year when you add in those novices and the Grand National horse, Iron Maximus, potentially going the Gold Cup route next year. It could be yet another vintage Gold Cup. Plenty of people didn't think Paul Townend was at his best on Galopin de Champs. I can see where they're coming from. It did look a fairly passive ride. He let JJ Slevin dictate things, but you can only do what the horse underneath lets you do. However, on Gaelic Warrior, I do think that's probably one of the poorest rides I've seen Paul Townend give this year. It's a horse that he knows stays further. It was fairly negative from the outset. He beat Il Était Temps very easily over this course earlier in the season when his jumping on Gaelic Warrior was just absolutely electric. This is a very, very athletic horse with a big stride and a high cruising speed. I didn't think he made the best use of that. Danny Mullins got the better of him on Il Était Temps. It's a run I will probably put a line through when assessing Gaelic Warrior. For all that, I just wonder if he's a little bit soft when he doesn't get his own way. Does he perhaps dig down and fight? Il Était Temps got the better of him fairly easily, I felt, and he then cast your mind back to Leopardstown and Factor. As soon as he got in front of him, Gaelic Warrior did seem to perhaps down tool slightly. Maybe there's a little kink in him there, for all that I do think he's an exceptional equine athlete. State Man was very impressive in doing what State Man does. Jumps, travels, keeps things uncomplicated, and essentially just wins. Irish Point set a stronger pace for him to run at, and he still managed to get the better of him. Plenty of people thought that Jack Kennedy had perhaps not ridden Irish Point to best effect in the Champion Hurdle, but I think this run at Punchestown just proved that State Man is a vastly better horse over 2 miles than Irish Point. Irish Point is a horse that's perhaps suffering from being in the same ownership and trainer care as Tihupu, the stayer's horse. I'm sure Irish Point is a stayer in the making. State Man goes through the gears, has to get sort of serious. He never really wins on the bridle. He always has to work a little bit, but he is a perennial winner and a horse that everyone should be very proud to have in Willie Mullins' yard. And this year was his year where he did get his Champion Hurdle glory. Another horse that I just would throw in as a takeaway is Anotherway. He was beaten on the Friday in the closing handicap hurdle. Absolutely tanked through the race over 2 miles, having fallen when tired over 2 mile 4 previously. Again, looked to have the race in the bag, made a bad error at the final hurdle, seemed to lose all momentum and maybe just knocked the wind out of his lungs a bit given that he'd gone so hard. Eventually got swallowed up and was beaten. Plenty of pelters for Paul Townend on social media. Quite what he was meant to do differently, I don't know. I thought this was a perfectly good ride on a very smart horse who pulled too hard. He's definitely got ability another way. I wonder whether he might be one that has a wind up in Ireland, which of course, frustratingly, we don't get to find out about because they're not declared. He did seem to stop quite suddenly when that mistake came, but he's clearly got a big engine. He's a name that's gone into my notebook, and I'd be keen to follow him next year. Potentially over fences, a big, strong horse. Fences might just get him to relax a bit, as they have done with plenty of Willie Mullins horses previously. So Anotherway is a name that I would encourage you to put in your trackers. Now for something a little bit different to usual. Producers George and Liam have tasked me to come up with my sort of best of in a few different criteria for the season. So the first one they gave me was Horse of the Year. Well, automatically I think State Man has to be in the mix for the conversation. Very, very competitive, very consistent, just goes about his business and wins and has got his Champion Hurdle on the CV now. But for me, it's John Bon. Bit of a Marmite horse for some people. I loved him all through his novice campaign and was really keen on him this year. Actually put him up as the 2 mile chase to follow this year. And I slightly lost my faith after that poor run at Trials Day in Cheltenham. But prior to that, he'd looked very impressive, winning the Schlur Chase and the Tingle Creek with Nico de Voiville on. James Bowen was on board on Trials Day. Perhaps just proved how important Nico de Voiville is to this horse. He's a good horse when he had Adrian Coleman on. He's a good horse when he had James Bowen on. But he's just a better horse when he's got Nico de Boinville. Missed Cheltenham, obviously, because of the concerns over the health of Nicky Henson Yard. Then went to Aintree and won the Melling Chase on soft ground over 2.5 miles. Had to fight really hard for that. Jumped beautifully. Got down and got dirty and really toughed it out to win in a real tenacious battle. And then backed that up just 2 weeks later, winning the Celebration Chase at Sandown, back over 2 miles, got the better of Al Fabiolo by virtue of better jumping. He wasn't perfect, he made some mistakes, but he seems to cope with his mistakes far better than Al Fabiolo copes with his. He put jumping under pressure and I thought was a very deserved winner. I'm fully back on board. I'm not going to slip off this John Bon train again. My faith is going to remain intact, and I do think if they keep him at 2 miles, with Nico de Bourbon on board, he can continue to cause Al Fabiolo trouble in that division. Trainer of the year now, and probably one of my better calls from the start of the season on the SBK preview podcast, trainer Robbie Llewellyn. I gave him as a name to follow, and it's certainly paid well. £42 to be exact, to a pound level stake profit for Robbie Llewellyn. 23% winners to runners over the season. That's second only to Willie Mullins in Britain. Been a really good season, and he spreads his talent very well. He's good at placing his horses. Horses like Hermie Legree's won 2 from 6. It would have been 3 from 6. He fell at the last on with a race at his Mersey on one occasion. And Top Cloud, bought out of other yards very inexpensively, seemingly improves them plenty and places them very well. And then you've got Titan Discovery, a young horse he's brought through by himself from the bumper field into handicap hurdles this year. He's been a highly progressive horse. He'll go on and win again next year, I'm sure. As for one to take forward next year, it's obviously going to get tougher for Robbie. But Ask Me Another is a mare owned by Lynn Redman, won really nicely at Hereford on her last start. She's going to go into mares handicaps next year, starting off a marker 97. She's probably got the speed to win over 2 miles, but she's definitely going to stay further, and I think it's the ideal sort of horse for her trainer to plot a very nice handicap campaign. I would think she'll win at least 2, 3, maybe even 4 races next year in mares handicap hurdles. Jockey of the season was the next section I was tasked with finding. And this is really tough. I thought the Jockey's Championship was a very welcome addition to the racing narrative this year. Harry Cobden and Sean Bowen, 2 clearly good friends, toughing it out. And it was really nice to see some very light-hearted, fun social media content. Shows the sport in a good light, I think. Particularly when I can remember back to the days of Dunwoody versus Adrian Maguire, which wasn't perhaps as friendly and as well-natured. Harry Cobden obviously got the best in the championship, but actually I'm going to give my Jockey of the Year to Sean Bowen. He was sailing along 31 winners ahead of Harry Cobden when he had that horrible fall at Aintree on Boxing Day, ruptured all sorts of ligaments and did plenty of damage to his knee. Good, again, social media coverage of his recovery, coming back, the great work he did at Oaksey House. Came back 10 weeks later. Harry Cobden had got much closer and eventually overtook him. But it was all done with really good grace, and there was just a few rides at Fastorslow in the closing few weeks that stuck in my head. Pilgrim's King, Valens Brouet, and Wide to the West. Wide to the West in particular was a typical Fastorslow handicap chase. The ground was very tough. At one point, I honestly thought Sean Bowen was going to get off, put the horse on his shoulders and carry it to go quicker. It was just an epitome of a never say die ride. Eventually got them up. It was a man possessed, and I thoroughly enjoyed watching it. And another one, Thunder Rock, winning the Premier Chase at Kelso. I thought that was a brilliant ride. We often talk about Sean Bowen being tough and being strong, but in this race, he was tactically very astute. He let them go on. He clearly knew what horse he had underneath them, and having tipped him and backed him, I was getting a little bit squeaky turning for home, and he was still sat not wanting to move and had spotted him a good few lengths. But he picked them up in a very stylish manner. It was a ride of a very cool man, and I really hope Sean Bowen can have an injury-free season next season and perhaps get that first jockey's title. Race of the year next. Well, obviously for me, there's only one, and it was the Juvenile Hurdle on March 11th at 1:50 from Stratford, when my dear Roger surprised us all and bolted up. But perhaps for the wider context of this podcast, I should think a little bit deeper. And for me, it was the Grand National. It's a race that I've struggled with over the years. I love jump racing. I love my horses, and I love being proud of the sport. And sometimes the Grand National has made that a little bit difficult, sort of some fairly ugly scenes and sort of animal welfare issues perhaps. Plenty of changes this year, a smaller field, different sort of setup, and for me it made for a far, far nicer race to watch. And it was competitive too. It's not the Grand National of old, but plenty of horses still in with a chance, coming across the Melling Road the final time and turning in. Really exciting race, won by Iron Maximus, the classiest horse in the race potentially. It was a race I thoroughly enjoyed watching. I had some really nice interaction within my wider family, aunts and uncles that don't perhaps normally follow racing as much, as clearly seem to enjoy it. I think that's a positive thing for racing. Lots of water being thrown around, lots of welfare issues being explained. It's really important we do that. Does, though, have to be consistent. I noticed a few people picked up on the fact that there was no water on show at Ayr for the Scottish Grand National. That's a very simple thing that racing can do better and must continue to do so. But for me, the Grand National and Iron Maximus was the race of the season. Ride of the year was a difficult one because, of course, you're struggling to remember and get rid of recency bias. There was a couple that stuck in my mind. Paul Townend on Absurd in the County Hurdle. I thought that was a brilliant ride. Very patient, weaving in and out, coming with a late run on a horse that had absolutely no right to thrive on the ground in the way it did. It was a ride of brilliance, and I watched it back a few times and continue to enjoy watching it. And I suspect it'll be one of those rides that when Paul Townend is retired, it'll feature in his show reel. Derek O'Connor on It's on the Line, you take your pick. His win in the Aintree Fox Hunters. That was brilliant, outpaced early. Found him in a nice rhythm, just kept nurturing him forwards, didn't put too much pressure on him and got there eventually. And then again at Punchestown, defy you to pull him out at any point of the race and say he was going well and looking the likely winner, bar in the final 10 yards. But again, patience, understanding of his horse and understanding of race pace. I think there was certainly a couple in the Punchestown Fox Hunters that went far too fast early. So Derek O'Connor was a contender. But then I remembered there's an absolute standout here, and I encourage you, if you haven't seen it or if you haven't watched it recently, go back and watch it again. Joe Anderson at Plumpton in January on Transmission. The horse made a horrific mistake at the first hurdle down the back, bounced Joe up in the saddle, both legs over one side. He did amazingly to just not hit the deck and to get back in the saddle. Then went without stirrups for about a circuit, and in his post-race interview said that was largely by design, because when he lifted his legs to try and get his feet back in the stirrups, it was edging the horse on, and he was worried the horse was going to race inefficiently. It sort of blows my mind that in that moment you can still have the clear-mindedness to think about the potential race efficiency and trying to conserve energy to still ride a race and be competitive. He eventually got his irons back, rode out to a very unlikely win. It is absolutely head and shoulders above anything anyone else has done this season. So Joe Anderson on Transmission for Neil Mulholland is by some way my ride of the season. The next one that I think this was producer George that sent me this was a little bit more challenging. What changes would I make to national hunt racing going forwards? Well, I'm a big advocate of trying to be positive about what we've got, and I do get frustrated sometimes when the narrative in racing press can be overly negative, for all that there are issues that we need to sort. There's a couple of things that particularly grind my gears. One is lack of clear communication from Clark of courses, read ground conditions, watering, and just generally accurate ground descriptions. We work on those, we rely on them. We can't often go and check the ground ourselves. It needs to be accurate, and so often you've sort of talked about that the ground is on the soft side of good, for example, and then within one race, jockeys are coming in and saying it's riding on the slow side of a soft. It's just not good enough. It's not good enough information in this day and age, and I really hope that more clear, open and readily available information from Clark's The Horse and Come. It's so easy these days with iPhones and smartphones with cameras on them. It's very easy just to clip that up, get it onto social media. Every racecourse has got a Twitter account or an X account. It's easy to get that information across to the punter, and I think it's something that's very important. And more detailed changes, I would get rid of the Turner's Chase at the Cheltenham Festival, the 2 mile 4 chase. I think it dilutes the two either side of it, the 2 mile and the 3 mile. I think you would also perhaps then increase horses that might not necessarily go from novice hurdling straight into chasing. If there was a real good horse looking for the Arkle, they can't skirt him by going 2 mile 4, so maybe they would go down the hurdle route. That improves the quality of the handicap hurdles, maybe even improves the quality of the champion hurdle. I would then bring back, if you get rid of the Turners, bring back the brilliant novice handicap chase at the Cheltenham Festival. That was always a good race, always turned up good horses. I never understood why they got rid of that. And if you did that, you could then restrict the plate, the 2 mile 4 handicap, the old Cathcart as it was, back to just handicappers, no novices in that. That gives the genuine handicappers a chance. I think they're really up against it when they're meeting progressive novices. I think that would improve the Cheltenham programme, because I'm assuming we're not going to go back to 3 days, which I think would solve plenty of problems. I think we're stuck with 4. So get rid of the Turners, bring back the novice handicap chase, make the plate for experienced handicappers only. I think that would be a step in the right direction. And then my final one, bumpers. 2 runs only in bumpers. I understand the need for them. They're a great way of educating horses on a race course without stressing them over obstacles. But 2 runs should be plenty. And of course, there will be some horses that's not enough for. So they can go on the flat route, overstaying trips. They can revert to the point-to-point field. British point-to-pointing is in desperate need of a better link with racing. It's seen as the poor version of point-to-pointing compared to its Irish counterpart. I think there's a way of maybe young horses going back into the point-to-point field if they're not sufficiently mature enough mentally to cope with hurdles. There's all-round a good thing. You increase maiden field sizes, you'd increase novice hurdle sizes, and you wouldn't get horses spending and wasting in many ways an entire season in bumpers. That brings me neatly on to the final section, which was 3 to follow. And the first horse is Redemption Day, who is a professional bumper horse at this point. But I think there has been, to some degree, reason to keep him in bumpers. He returned fairly late this year after a 611-day layoff. To my mind, he could have comfortably gone hurdling in December, but I understand that you might feel that perhaps with October and November going missing, you're at a disadvantage in terms of experience. He put up a really good performance at Punchestown to win the bumper there, quickened up smartly, having travelled strongly on better ground. And I think better ground for this horse is really important. Blue Brazils do tend to go on most grounds, but he doesn't. His very best form is on a sound surface. I tipped him up as a supreme novice candidate this year, so I'm a little bit salty about the fact that they kept him over bumpers. Maybe that shaped my previous point of 2 bumper runs only. But he's clearly a smart horse, and I don't think the bumper crop this year are up to all that much. Would be no surprise to see him go down the Supreme route next year. Might even be him and A Dream to Share, who of course has missed this season as well, at the head of the market heading into the Supreme at Cheltenham. So Redemption Day is the first name on my list as a horse to follow. Second horse is another Willie Mullins trained horse. It'd be very easy just to focus on Willie Mullins horses. But Quai De Bourbon, horse I really like. He's definitely a 3-mile chaser in the making. I loved what he did at Ayr over 2 mile 4. Travelled strongly, jumped soundly, looks thoroughly uncomplicated. I'd be pretty certain that given he's in the Gigginstown colours and they are in the habit of liking chasers over hurdlers, that this horse will go over fences next season, provided he gets his feet in the right order. He's got the physique to jump fences very nicely, so Quai De Bourbon is definitely a horse I want to keep on side. And then the final one is the Jukebox Man. Slightly broke my heart at Cheltenham in the Albert Bartlett, having tipped him up at 33 to 1. He got collared late on there, having really lost plenty of momentum at the final hurdle. But other than that, he is an exceptional jumper. I love watching him through his races. His ears prick. He spots his takeoff stride from a long way out. He's a very natural jumper. I'm sure he's going to be better over fences when that ability to measure fences and jump at speed is amplified. You get more fences in a race than you do get hurdles. If you're good at fences, it can really improve your rating to a different level. He's already a very solid horse. I think he was perhaps a little bit below his best at Aintree when well beaten last time, but just travelled without the same zip. Still ran well to finish second. Ben Pauling's had a good season. He's going to rebuild, obviously, having lost the Megson horses next year, and I think the Jukebox Man might well be one of his leading novice chase contenders for next year. So Jukebox Man, Quai De Bourbon and Redemption Day are my 3 to follow for next season. So that is it for the first series of Miller's Movers. I hope you've enjoyed it. As ever, if I've missed a ride of the season that's glaringly obvious, if I've missed a performance of the season by a horse, if John Bon wasn't the horse of the year, let me know in the comments. Get in touch on X and we can discuss it there. And I will be back probably October next season to pick up with Miller's Movers, trying to find some handicap blots going forward.